Amen. If you'll join me, we're going to be in Jonah chapter 2, and we will read all of it. This is the prayer. We have spent the first several weeks in our series looking at the first chapter of Jonah, and Jonah got last week, right? He got thrown overboard into the raging seas, and we know that he is swallowed by a fish, and this is what we're about to read. Chapter 2, verse 1, Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and all your billows passed over me. And then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. And the waters closed in over me to take my life. And the deep surrounded me, and weeds were wrapped about my head. At the roots of the mountains I went down to the land, whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought me up, my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. And those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you what I have vowed. I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. Now, we all love a good story, right? We all love good movies and good TV and good books, and we know that those stories, there comes a moment of sort of great tension when the character of the hero gets revealed, right? The sort of the chips are down, and we're waiting. Is this person gonna be able to come through? Are their friends gonna come through for them? Are they gonna get saved? Are they gonna be courageous, or are they gonna wilt under the pressure? And that's the moment we find this morning. This is Jonah, right? We know the story, most of us, right? We've heard it, certainly over these last couple of weeks. Jonah's been called by God, go tell the Ninevites that I love them enough to redeem them, and they've got to stop being evil. Jonah doesn't want to do that. His own prejudice, his own feelings, his own doubts come into play, and he runs in the opposite direction. He's on the boat, right? He's in the belly of the boat, and he's asleep, and the captain comes down and says, brother, you got to wake up. We're dying up here. There's this horrendous storm that is raging around us. Will you come up? And they ask him. Jonah reveals who he is and that the storm is about him, and says to them, listen, you got to throw me overboard. You got to, like, my life is the thing that's going to make this storm stop. And here's Jonah, right? And it feels in some ways like, well, that's the end of the story. He's been thrown into the drink and he's going to die. Jonah thought that this was the end of his story. Jonah thought that he was going to go to the depths and the bottom and wrap his feet in the seaweed, and God was going to, crush him for his disobedience. And yet, we know what happens, right? We know that there's the twist in the story, as it were, as so often many great stories have. The unexpected thing happens. And for many of us, right, we've heard this story so many times. Most of us have heard it from the time that we were this age, right? From the time we were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, we've heard this story. And so we lose the punch, the twist that the fish swallows Jonah. We would all, right, if we were watching the movie, we would expect that something, right, it's tragic. When you throw somebody into the raging storm and they fall to the bottom, you think they're dead. But the great twist is that God is what? He's been chasing Jonah the whole time. The storm has been for his purpose, and so much so that he's had the fish prepared. Now, sometimes people want to know, is this a whale? Is this a fish? We don't really see any big fish out anywhere in the sea that are actually capable of doing this, and it causes people sort of to wrestle and to doubt. And if it was normal for big fish to swallow humans and hold them for 3 days and spit them out up on land, this wouldn't be miraculous. Right? This is the twist of the story, is that God does something beyond what is normal, beyond what is expected. It's miraculous. Did God form a single fish for this period of time, for this moment, with unique biology to swallow a man, hold him for 3 days, and spit him up? Is this some fish that had been around for this whole purpose of time, and then once this had been fulfilled, he's no more? Is there still this fish swimming around in the depths of the ocean, down where man can't even go because it's so deep and so unexplored? I don't know. I just know God did it. I just know that miraculously, he had a fish swallow Jonah, hold him for 3 days, where Jonah is going to go through this interchange that we're going to read about, and then spit him back up. God grabs him for this miraculous time frame where his grace is going to be poured out and revealed, and then spits him back out. We see Jonah, right? I mean, Jonah's flaws have been on display. I don't know about you, but there are moments, there are times in our lives when our flaws are on display, right? When we lose it. When we say something that we wish we hadn't said, we do something we wish we hadn't done, and there's always somebody, it feels like, right, who saw it. Like when you're walking into the store and you're sort of, you're walking and you're feeling pretty good about yourself, and you trip, and you never trip when nobody's watching. You always trip right in everything, and you're just like, that's mortifying. And Jonah's flaws have been on display. The sailors have seen it, and the captain's seen it, and certainly God has seen it, and Jonah has begun to see it in himself. And his prejudice, right? We've seen that over these couple of weeks, that his lack of love, his lack of belief that the Ninevites were of equal value to him, that his Jewishness, his being an Israelite wasn't the thing that was redeeming about him. It's been revealed. In his inability, as we've talked, is to even understand what grace is. That here's Jonah, right? The professional prophet. He's a preacher. His job has been to declare the things of God, to hear them and to declare them to the people around him, and he's missed the very message that he's been called to. And so we get, right? I mean, Jonah, the only way we can have his prayer is that Jonah himself chooses to reveal what God has done on the inside of him. That Jonah chooses transparency. Jonah doesn't leave this heart shift and movement inside of him, I'm just going to keep this to myself, but he knows that there's power in it for us who will hear it in the future. So we get his prayer. He's crying out, he's begging, he's desperate. And when we come to the end of his prayer, right, when we come to verses 8 and 9, sort of the pinnacle of his prayer, those who pay regard to vain idols, Jonah says, they forsake their hope of steadfast love. They've settled for lesser gods, Jonah's saying. And I think what clearly the indication would be that on one hand, this is him. I think he's also talking about all of us, but I think he's talking specifically about himself. I'm someone who has been paying regard to vain idols. I've been worshiping something other than the God of the universe. I've forsaken hope of steadfast love. And we're going to talk about it here in a minute, but that for steadfast love is hesed. It's Old Testament covenantal, unconditional love. But verse 9, but I with the voice of thanksgiving will sacrifice to you what I have vowed to you. I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And Jonah comes, right? He gives us this picture at the end that he's been worshiping something other than God himself. And that worshiping of something other than God himself has been keeping him from God's unconditional, steadfast, covenant love. But that now here at the bottom of the ocean, in the belly of the whale, God has chased him. His grace has got him. And now he understands. And the fish spits him out. He comes to the end, right? He comes to this moment and this revelation and this transformation and this stuff has happened. And in that, he's been prepared. He's ready to go fulfill and do the things that the Lord has called him to do. So the fish spits him out. This is where God has wanted to get him. The chasing God has caught the running Jonah. Now, I want you to think about yourself for a minute. If Jonah Right? And this is Jonah who's had direct conversation with God. This is Jonah, Old Testament prophet, hearing from the Lord, clear call. If Jonah has missed grace, if Jonah has misunderstood the very nature of God and the depth of his own sin and the idol worship of his heart, if Jonah has missed that, how much more danger are you and I in? Is it possible, maybe even I'm going to say likely, that we have, in big ways and small ways, been blind to grace? And our big idea, like if we're shooting an arrow this morning, I want you to hear this. Our deepest troubles, our most profound difficulty is caused when we miss the true depths of God's grace. When we miss that, that is where the real difficulty of our life. Now, that's not that we don't have secondary causes and there aren't other things that are going on, right? Sometimes there are waves that are crashing and shipwrecks going on and some of that kind of stuff. But when we miss God and His grace, that's where the real trouble comes. Now, until we get this, until we get that the chasing, gracious love of God, and until that catches us, I think we're locked up, we're sort of foiled. We're bound and trapped. And we're just shadows of who we can and even will be. So this morning, let's ask ourselves some question. What is grace? We'll start there. We're going to define it and see that, I think, right here in this passage. What is grace? How do we get it? And how do we know we have it? Let's start with grace. One of the most common words for grace in the Old Testament sounds like the word hen, like the female chicken. But that word is what often translated favor. One of the spots we see that is in Genesis chapter 3. There's a story in Genesis of brothers, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob and Esau were at odds. Their dad loved one of those brothers and the mom loved the other, and there was this competition and all of this kind of stuff. Jacob tricks and wins the favor of the blessing poured out on him by his dad. He tricked his brother into getting that, and the result of that trickery, of that deception, of that evil is that he flees because he's afraid his brother's going to destroy him. And he doesn't just flee for a day or two, but for years. He flees, he has a wife, he has kids, and he wants to come home, he wants to get back in. And his desire to get back in, it finally comes to a head, and he's sort of walking, marching, bringing his flocks and his wife and his kids, and he's headed back to the land where his brother has been, and his brother hears that he's coming. And so there's going to be this sort of collision out in this big field, and when we see that, Jacob walks in and he says, listen, he says, let me in. Show me favor. You don't have to. You have the right to destroy me here, he says. But I want back in. What he doesn't do as he's walking back in, he doesn't demand his rights. That's the opposite of favor. He doesn't appeal to some, right? He just shows up and literally just throws himself on and goes, I don't deserve it, and you're under no obligation to let me, but let me back in, please. He asks for favor. This thing that is beyond what I've deserved or what I've earned, it's the opposite of wages. There's being let into some place that you don't have to be let into. You don't even have a right to be there. Let's give it a little more firmness. Grace is the favor to the undeserving by the unobliged, the unobligated. Favor is to the undeserving by the unobligated. This is being let into some place you don't have the right to be by a person who doesn't have to let you in. Now there's two pieces of that. First of that is being let into something, right? Look at verse 6 in chapter 2 of Jonah. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever, right? Jonah has gone to the bottom of the ocean. And it feels like between him and life is this overwhelming stuff. He's trapped. He's bound. That's where he belongs. That's what he's deserved. Right? He came to the spot on the boat. I've ran from God. I've been disobedient. The consequence of that is I deserve death. Throw me in. That's what will make this all stop. And he's gotten that. He's come to the bottom. Yet, and it's a beautiful yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. And in that yet, right, that I've gotten what I deserved, yet you, God, did this. You brought something different into my life. Not because I've deserved it or earned it or convinced you, but because you, God, your character, O Lord my God, you gave me grace. I was far from you. The very earth, the very ocean is keeping me from you. But you, God, you brought me out. You let me in. Now, sometimes we talk about hospitality, right? Sort of that act of being gracious inside of our homes. And when we think about that, if you'll let me sort of use this metaphor for us this morning, the idea that grace is really being let into God's house. And that if you think about your own house, if you're being hospitable to somebody, it's not enough to sort of just open the door. But those with the gift of hospitality, those who express it well, right? When somebody comes into your house, you think about what do they need. And you look at them and go, is it hot outside? Are they sweaty? Do they need a cold drink of water? Do they need a comfortable chair to sit in? Maybe they need a bed to sleep in or a blanket to wrap up in. Do I need to light them a fire? Do I need to make them a cup of coffee or buy like soda or what's going on? Are they hungry? Do I need to light a candle? What's going to make them inside this home feel welcomed and drawn and encouraged? That's what's going on here. This is letting someone in for the purpose of sort of God's cosmic hospitality to meet all of his multitude of needs. I want you to think with me. There's a common dream, right? Often we hear about it, people talk about it, where people have that moment as they're dreaming and they wake up, right, and they're afraid or they're scared or whatever, where they felt like the thing that they needed in that moment wasn't there. When you're a young person, right, and you've got sort of school and tests and stuff, how often, maybe you didn't ever do it, but often you'll hear people tell of the time that they woke up and they're going, I wasn't ready, I hadn't studied for my test, or my homework wasn't there, or or the person who's a public speaker, they stand up and they talk about, right, they lost their notes, or they were standing there in their underwear and the people couldn't, right, and they felt judged, or there's this common theme, as you talk to people, and what kind of things terrify, what are your nightmares about? That in the moment when we needed to stand in front of someone to be tested and approved so that we could get into the circle, we came up short. We were found lacking. And this idea that we sort of on our insides feel not up to the task. That we feel like when the chips are down, when the story and the drama of our life, when our moment of great conflict comes, we're gonna wilt under that, and so often we do. Right? How many times have you been in a conversation or a conflict, right? And maybe it was your boss or it was that client or the customer who was being rude and sassy, and you have the interaction and then you walk away and you go, oh my goodness, why didn't I just say this? Why didn't I do that? Why didn't I stand for this thing why did I let them just sort of walk over? Why did I let them treat that other person this way? Why did I not in that moment sort of show myself to be this thing that I know that I can be? And we don't measure up. Our opportunity to get in, to be accepted, to be led into some inner circle that matters to us. And we've all got different inner circles. For some of us, it's our work. For some of us, relationship, right? For some of us, it's the guys that we play golf with. For some of us, right? We've all got these different. We want to be good enough. We want somebody to let us in. to know we're on the inside. And I don't know about you, but sometimes we have that mind, it's almost like, well, I don't really want to still be a middle school girl. I was never a middle school girl, but I don't want to still put my hopes and my dreams and myself in the hands of these people who don't really even like me, who are themselves trying to figure out whether or not they fit in, right? And the cheering and the piling up but that's where we end up. We end up with this sort of feeling, this internal thing going, I'm just not enough. I don't have it. Our souls long for it. And as we unpack this, what we figure out is that in this moment, the gospel shows up. That is the good news. See, the idea that so often gets sort of twisted about and corrupted is that the good news, the gospel of Jesus, is that he's came because you're a dirty, slimy guy, and he's just really trying to clean you up. So if you could just keep these rules better. That's not good news. That's bad news. That's, hey there, I don't feel good enough, and somebody comes along and goes, well, you're surely not good enough, but if you could try really hard, then maybe, just maybe. And we're still left going, I don't know if I'm really good enough. That's not good news. The good news of the gospel is that we're not enough, and he lets us in anyway. The circle that we want, the echo that we're feeling when we're trying to convince the guys at work or the guys on the golf course or the relationship we want, that's the echo of we desire God, the God of the universe, to embrace us and to love us and to welcome us. Our souls long for it. And we've been working and efforting and wanting to impress, and on one level, right, that's what is showing up in our ongoing recurring nightmares. We've tried and we've failed. We get close. Right? Have you ever tried to keep it clean for a long time? To be good, to be really good, to impress somebody? And then, inevitably, our tongue or our attitude or our actions it trips us up, and it feels like we've gone all the way back to the beginning, and we've undone all of the good that we thought we had accomplished. We run away, right? I mean, that's the picture we see here in Jonah. Sin is that running away. It's that knowing where God wants and who he is, and we've gone the other way. We've ran in the other direction, and it takes us where we didn't really want to be. But grace, isn't that a beautiful sentence? That's a whole sentence. But grace. But grace says, you don't measure up, you aren't in the circle, you aren't good enough, but God lets us in anyway. He invites us in because of what Jesus has done. And grace isn't just being let in, but it's being let in when we don't deserve it and when the other person isn't obligated. Right, this is the opposite of wages. Wages are those things that your effort, your payment for your diligence. That's not what this is. This isn't even exchanging kindness. Right? Sometimes we say we're going to exchange favors, right? You're going to do something nice for me. Don't worry, I'll catch you on the next time. Right? You're out to lunch and you forgot your wallet, and your friend says, no big deal, I take care of this one. You get the next one. That's not what this is. That's just exchange. That's just borrowed favor. That's you buy my coffee, I'll buy yours the next time. You let me borrow your chainsaw, I'll let you borrow my mower. You took care of me when our electricity was out, I'll get you on the flip side. That's not what we're talking about. This is grace. You don't deserve it, and the other person isn't obligated to do it. Grace says to us that no human being, no one is good enough. We all need it. And it's a two-sided thing, grace. Nobody's bad enough that they can't get it. Don't miss this. On one side, it says that we all need it desperately. We've got no hope without it. And on the other side, it says that there isn't anybody that God can't reach with his grace. This is why Jonah, look at verse 6. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever, right? This is Jonah under the convicting weight of the reality of his sin and desperation and brokenness. Jonah's gotten it. Jonah's gotten to the spot. He knows he's ran. He knows he deserves punishment and consequence. And yet, you brought up my life from the pit. Look at verse 4. Then I said, I'm driven away from your sight, right? Jonah goes, I've been running in my sin. I've been lost and broken. Yet I shall look again upon your holy temple. I'm desperate. I'm lost. I got nothing on my own. And yet I know, God, I can look at your temple. When you get grace, you get the yet. You get that we deserve the banishment, the separation, the thrown into the sea. We've earned the consequence and the punishment, and yet I'm welcomed. And yet God opens the door and says, come home. And yet you've brought my life up out of the pit. I was in this condition, and yet you loved me. You pursued me. You heard me. You welcomed me. You invited me in. And friends, this is what allows us to accurately look at our life. We don't have to keep dissembling and lying and sort of smudging the truth and hoping that it's in this moment we can confess, we can acknowledge and agree with God. This is who I actually am. This is the wrong things that I've actually done. That's where confession sits. We can be honest. We no longer have to argue that our value is somehow based on our own achievement, because we know that our value isn't. It's wholly based in Him. This unlocks the door and we get to enter. Cosmic hospitality. We know we have no right to be here, and yet we are fully welcomed in. The promise of God is we get to be called what? Sons and daughters. We don't just keep being sort of strangers and weirdos who sit over in somebody else's borrowed chair. But God makes us a room. And He makes us our own bed and our own desk, right? And our own, we belong here. That's grace. So how do I get it? How do we get grace? If you can't earn it, right? I mean, the very definition of it says that we can't earn it. How do I get it and receive it? Paul in Colossians 1 has a line as he's introing his letter. He's writing it to the church, to the believers, to the people there. And he says, listen, since the day you heard it and understood it, you've gotten the grace of God. You hear it and you understood it. And as that passage continues, he says that in that moment, after you've heard it and understood it, you begin those who are bearing fruit, you become functioning. This is when it starts to come alive in us. When we hear it and we understand it and it begins to sort of take root and fruitfulness starts to flow up. We hear it and we understand it. What do we have to hear and understand? We start it, right? We've said this. We don't deserve it. Catching Jonah, what that took was him down in the depths. Jonah comes to a spot where sort of he gets the depth of his sin, that the consequence of the things that he has done and said put him at the bottom of the sea. That's the depth of his sin. The consequence of that is the gap and the separation between him and life is so great. Jonah's grabbing a hold. He's hearing and understanding the depth of his sin. And he's seeing that holy, almighty Creator God, right? He sees the height of His love and mercy. And he begins to see, right, the grace, our understanding it, our hearing and understanding, is that gap between those two things. The depth of our sin, the height of His love, and that Jesus has met and brought that together. Now, there are three kinds of folks. There are folks who have a low view of their own sin. Right? They believe that the stuff that they've done, the stuff that they've said, the attitudes of their heart are not sufficient to condemn them. That they're not really that bad. That surely there are more people that are at least worse than they are. They can't believe So they have a low view of their own sin. There are people who have a low view of God's mercy. People with a low view of their own sin, people with a low view of God's mercy, they believe, right, that I'm so bad that God could never get to me. That the distance between where he's at and where I'm at, right, he could never, his love could not penetrate that far. He can't get to me, I'm too bad. And then there's folks who can see both of those things. They can see the depth of their own lostness and the height of his mercy. And by seeing both of those things, they get grace. If you ever know somebody that is wearing an eye patch, what do they lose? They lose depth perception. They lose the ability to perceive how far or near something actually is. That's what happens when we only have one of the two things. We fail to see it in an accurate sort of way. We have to have both eyes open. We have to be able to see both our depth of sin and God's height of mercy. And this is so often when we see people move from death and depravity and lostness and brokenness, and they come to that spot where they're born again. They come to the spot of life. It's that one of these eyes was closed. And in that moment, what happens is God opens the other eye. And so maybe they were the person who didn't get that they were sinful. They knew God was holy. They knew that he was sort of good and perfect and loving, but they had no idea how sinful they were. And all of a sudden God peels that off and they see their own sinfulness. And all of a sudden they can see God's love and their sinfulness. And in that moment, the explosion takes place. Or there's somebody who sees their own depth of depravity and they know they're broken. They see the mess they've made of their life, but they could never believe, they could never see how much God loved them. And God peels that eye patch off and they can see with both eyes, and in that moment they're transformed. This double-eyed vision brings the moment of regeneration. That's what being born again is. And in an ongoing way, I believe that this is how we mature. Right, for some of us, at the moment, right, when God first peeled whichever eye patch we were lacking, for some of us that was a year ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, 30 years ago. But on a regular basis, I believe maturity is when we take, and God goes, you're missing this. You failed to see how holy I really am. You've missed it. You failed to understand. Or you fail to see that this thing in your heart, this attitude, this motive, this thing that's sitting underneath, you failed to see it as sinfulness and brokenness and depravity. And as God peels that back, that's where maturity comes. In an ongoing way, this is how God moves and transforms us. The realization of the depth of our sin and the height of his mercy and love. This is certainly what happened to Jonah. I mean, Jonah knew and believed that God could save. I mean, we've looked at that in these weeks past, right? He ran because he knew that God could save the Ninevites and he didn't want him to. We're going to see that in a couple of weeks. Jonah didn't doubt that God's mercy and grace was real or capable. What Jonah lacked was an ability to see himself accurately as someone who was every bit in need as the Ninevites of grace and mercy. And in the belly of the whale, what God does is he peels back that eye patch and reveals Jonah's depth of his depravity. And that's where the transformation takes place for Jonah. Don't settle. Don't settle for a sort of wishy-washy, yeah, I'm a sinner, you're a sinner, we're all sinners. Notice, Jonah has to get confronted by the specific nature of his sin in order for this transformation to take place. Jonah had to identify what the actual idols of his heart were. When we're running from God, we've got to ask ourselves, where are we running to? What is the thing that we're trusting? What's the altar sort of that we set up in our life, right? And we sort of kneel down at it and we hope for it and we throw our money in front of it, right? And what's that thing in your life Success, money, sex, kids, relationships, retirement, achievement, pleasure. What is it? What's the thing for you? Because when we identify, right, that's where freedom is. Freedom is that peeling back and going, this is the thing I've been trusting. This is the place that I've been running to. For many of us, we've got a pet sin. We've got that thing that we sort of hide in the corner. And when other people are in the room, right, we don't tend to let that out. We just kind of keep it, and we sort of keep a blanket over top of it. But the moment it feels like nobody else is watching and we're really hurt, or we're really sad, or we're really tired, or we're really, right, in that moment, right, we go, I deserve it. It won't hurt just like a little bit. And we tell a little white lie, or we look at a little of something that we know we shouldn't have. We dabble in a relationship that we know is unhealthy. And we go back and we sort of pull it back out and we go, this is this thing. We run to it and we feed it and we sort of stroke its little head, right? We pet it like it's a dog. That's the idol of our life. We've got to recognize things, friend. We've got to smash those idols, call them what they are. Those things let us down. We know that. We've already been let down by them. They're dead. There's no life there. That thing has no means of getting you from the bottom of the sea to life. But we keep trusting him. Smash those idols. So here's Jonah, right? Jonah's in the big fish. He's looking at his sin. He's seeing its depths. He's smashing the sins of his heart. And, right, he's not just looking at his own depths, but he's seeing the heights of God's love. He's looking at his temple. He says that sort of in multiple times and places here. Jonah sees that he's banished, right? He's at the bottom of the sea, and yet he's what? What does it say? And yet I'm looking, God, at the temple. Now, what's significant about the temple? Why? In the bottom of the sea, in the belly of a fish, is he thinking about Jerusalem and the temple? What's there? Why is it helpful? Because Jonah knows that God's grace isn't cheap. Jonah knows that what God hasn't done is simply said, ollie, ollie, oxen free, you're all dumb sinners, we're all dumb sinners, it'll be just fine, all the sinners are just welcome. God doesn't change his rules. God's not the teacher who gave out a test that everybody got an F on and went, well, it doesn't really matter, I'm grading on a curve anyway. So inside the bell, we'll just move everybody over to here and you all get to pass. It will be just fine. That's not it at all, right? Because what did Jesus do? Jesus came and walked in perfection. He got the A. He's the curve buster. And so God can't be grading on a curve. His grace, his mercy is costly. And so when Jonah is looking at his temple, he knows that's where the mercy seat of God sits. In Exodus, it describes that, right, there's the tabernacle, that's not the right word, the Ark of the Covenant. Right, if you've ever seen the original Indiana Jones, right, the thing that they carry on the poles, right, and it's got, sitting on top of that, a gold lid. That is the mercy seat of God. It's got the angels and their wings, right? If you read in Exodus, it describes that. That's the spot where when animals were sacrificed, the blood of those animals were dropped, spread, dripped, thrown at the mercy seat of God. Do you know what sits under that? What was inside the Ark of the Covenant? Was the copy of the Ten Commandments. The written down law of God, the standards of perfection, the call of God to live in a particular way that nobody measures up. So sitting inside of the ark is the command of God that we all fail at. On top of it is the mercy seat where the blood sacrifice is spilled in order to what? To wash. In order to make the way. That's Exodus 25 if you're a kind of note-taking kind of person. See, this is where that mercy seat of God is where the running and the chasing Our running in sin, his chasing in mercy and grace, this is where they collide. This is where the depth of our sin and the height of his love meet. We know, right, because we don't just have the Old Testament, we've got the whole book. We know that what Jonah is seeing, what the temple was just a foreshadow. It was a picture. It was a glimmer of the thing that was coming, and that was Jesus. And that Jesus on the cross, right, is going to be the perfect meeting of our running in sin and God's chasing in grace. And that his shedding of his blood is the thing that now washes. And we receive the grace of God when we understand our need. I'm a sinner who can't save myself, and that God sent Jesus as a demonstration of the height of his love. He loved us so much that while we were still sinners, what? Christ died for us. Jesus came. We're sinners in need of a Savior. Jesus is that sent Savior. And now when we see both things, right, we've got both eyes. That's when we get the spiritual explosion of regeneration and new birth. John chapter 3 says we're born again when we see both those things, our deep need and his high love. So how do we know? That should be the question. That's next. How do we know we have it? How do I know that I've heard it and I understand it? How do we know? Real quickly, because we're going to spend the next several weeks sort of unpacking this internal and external thing that's going to be going on inside of Jonah. That's what the next weeks we'll be looking at. But we see here in Jonah there's internal change and there is external change. First, in verse 8, look at the external change. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. Now, I believe this is Jonah inside the belly of the fish, and God is revealing the idols of his own heart. I believe he also is well aware that he is being sent to idol worshipers in Nineveh. And so what is happening, right, his heart attitude had been, they're the bad idol-worshiping people, I've been the good Jew, and all of a sudden God has changed and transformed so that now, in an external way, he is going to go to the people of Nineveh. External change, he begins to see and understand that this has said, this covenantal love that is for him is not just for him, but it is for them. The same love that Jonah gets. And so his prejudice, the thing that's been keeping him, the thing that put him on the boat, is the thing that's going to send him to Nineveh. He's been transformed. And he comes to the spot where he believes that not just he can change, but they can change. The internal change, and again, we'll spend weeks looking at this stuff, is that Jonah gets, in this moment, the peace and the rest and the joy that only comes from God and his grace. He's been racked with guilt. He was in the bottom of the boat. He's allowed them to throw him off the side of the thing, right? He's gone down to the very depths. But look at verse 9. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you what I have vowed. I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Salvation is his. He's come to the end of himself. He has set down the need to impress. He has stopped believing and living in a way that says my effort and my work and my stuff is going to get me there. Because salvation is of the Lord. And those are characteristic markers of transformed lives. Salvation is the Lord's. Well, friends, we're going to pray this morning, and I hope you'll come back over these next weeks as we unpack this. But I want to say this. We're going to stop. The band's going to come, and we're going to stand together and sing and come to the communion table like we do. And we have been having guys ladies, stand on the sides so that you have an opportunity to pray. And this morning, if you're someone, and maybe you've identified for the very first time that you are someone who has been running and that God has been chasing, and this morning is your morning, we invite you to come, and one of these people would love to pray with you. Maybe this morning you've identified the idol of your heart, the thing that you keep running to that needs smashed, and you just need somebody to pray with you that you would have the courage to do it. They would that's what they're for. Maybe you've got some other need, it's a physical need or an emotional need or just something, and you just want somebody to pray with you. That's why we have these folks up here in the front. So let's stand together as the band comes, and we will pray, and then we will sing together. Father, we come. And we come as a people who have been running. Some of us have never allowed your chase to get to us yet, and I pray that this morning would be our morning. And Father, for others of us, we've been the door's been opened and we've come in and we've got a bed, but we've got those things, those sins, those idols in our rooms that we keep feeding them and petting them and holding on to them and defending them. And Father, I pray this morning we would have the courage, because of your great love, to smash those idols. And Father, I pray that would be what characterizes us. That we would be individuals and families and a church body that is willing to be honest and go, we are broken and lost and at the bottom and the end of ourselves. And you in your mercy and your grace have chased us. And you revealed that need, and that, Father, we are those who have entered into your home and are now called sons and daughters, that we might live there in joy and peace and rest and power. And we pray these things in the great name of Jesus. Amen.